It's another time to check up with Dr. Mark. And today we have Pastor Lou VanderMeer. And I know this guy pretty well because he's my dad. And we invited him today because he is bringing to you a perspective from a senior pastor perspective. That is, he is a senior pastor of New Community Church, our main church that we partner with, but also representing probably, and I would assume, the perspective of many senior pastors across the country and, of course, around the world. And today we want to check up with him because he has some important points, perspectives to share with you after a good 50 years of ministry, as he has worked with people who have been in and out of addiction, life issues, of course. And so, Pastor Lou, we welcome you to check up with Dr. Mark, to check up with us and help us to gain perspective, especially in this time of anxiety and fear and dealing with the uncertainty that this virus crisis has created. But more importantly, what we want to do is we want to take a look at how it is with ministry and also the church, because too often people who get caught up in addictions think that the church is not a safe place. I don't belong there. How do I cope? And so really, how can the church become that safe place for those of us who fall into the addiction trap?
Well, it begins with leadership. You cannot expect the people of the congregation to automatically learn how to accept people who are coming through the door that have issues. They are good people. They are not, for the most part, intentionally avoiding others. They, hopefully, because they're members of the church, are not prejudiced, but they are not trained, and it takes training. I would say it's very much like a situation in which you have a couple that is part of a church congregation. They're members of that congregation for years and years. They've got friends in the church, other couples that they have had lunch with, coffee with, attend church with, and then that couple gets a divorce. And all of a sudden, the one who remains in the congregation feels shut out. And they will oftentimes say to me, since the divorce, my friends seem to be avoiding me. Now, that isn't, again, because the friends are prejudiced, and it isn't because they have anger necessarily. It could be, but not necessarily. But often it's because they don't know what to say. They just don't know how to act. And so rather than be embarrassed, say the wrong thing, they just tend to hold back to avoid encountering that individual. And I believe it's the same way with individuals who have issues in life. If you know that a person is coming through the door and they've been in prison or they've had an addiction problem, it's difficult to know how to act. How do I act towards that person? And so rather than blunder, make mistakes, you just avoid them. If you see them coming, you walk on the other side of the lobby, or you take a different hallway. So what has to happen is that leadership has to teach the people. You have to teach them, number one, that accepting, loving, and helping people into recovery is part of our Christian responsibility. This is done by way of Bible passages and sermons, and not necessarily one sermon series, but on a regular basis, the pastor will make comments in the messages about accepting, about loving, about that's our responsibility, and if you avoid people, that's not the Christian way to act. And then to begin to give practical direction on how to encounter people and how to accept them. And so just say to people things like, when you see this person coming through the door who has been in prison or, has been addicted, or they've been in some kind of treatment center, go up to them, take the initiative, go up to them. I was going to say shake hands, but of course we are in the virus right now, but encounter them with a smile. You don't have to somehow begin treatment there in the hallway or in the lobby.
Yeah.
All you have to do is be nice to them. That's all you have to do. Be nice to them. Maybe if you do have a coffee table going, invite them to come and join you at the coffee table. And then you don't have to somehow begin talking about addiction or prison. You just invite them to the coffee table and continue your discussion. Make them feel that they're one of the gang, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, without getting too involved, it begins with leadership, teaching the people, because they're good people. And once they learn how they should act and how to act, they will begin to do that. Next.
Well, that check up, that's a good checkup for us. Where are we at as people? And we're all in recovery. And I had Dr. Ryan on a couple weeks ago, and he talked about himself, not only dealing with codependency, but also dealing with a religious addict, church addict, teacher addict. I mean, all that, that's probably what you and I deal with, of course, being work addicts and so on. But what you're talking about is relationships. And that's the key in helping each person come closer to Christ and become more whole. But as you've been counseling people for over 50 years through their life issues, what has been the most common trigger towards relapse?
Well, location is part of that.
Okay.
When people get back into the same places that they used to be,
yeah,
that triggers it, because they're reminded of that's where I had the cigarette, that's where I had the drink, mm-hmm. That's where I shot the drugs into my arm, or I smoked the joints and so forth. And these are the people with whom. And so returning to the places and the people. And so it's important to not re-enter those places. I really remember many, many years ago, a lady saying to me, she came out of prison and she had been involved with drugs and alcohol. She said, can you find a place for me to stay? Because the only place that I have to stay is my family's house, my parents' house. And I know that if I get back there, I'm going to be in the same location with the same friends, and I'm going to get back into the same trouble. So we found a place for her to stay. So I would say that that's one of it. Another one is what we were talking about in the first question, rejection. That if you're feeling rejection, now that gives you a quote unquote reason to go back, because you have anger. You say, well, nobody gives a rip, nobody cares, so I might as well just go back into my old life. And then, of course, there's the urges. There's the fact that you have urges, and it's important to teach people that it takes time before the urge, well, maybe it never goes away, but it lessens. You need to teach them. I remember a guy who was sexually addicted to this one woman. Now, he loved his wife, and he was ready to admit that his wife was a wonderful woman, but he was sexually addicted to this woman. And she finally walked away from the relationship. But it just tore him apart. It just tore him apart. And I had to teach him that it's going to take at least 30 days for some of the initial urge to go away, and then probably another 6 months. So there's some thoughts.
Well, sure. And recovery is a lifetime. And it's, of course, we talk about theologically, it's a form of sanctification, becoming more like Jesus. And as we extend the hand of relationship to those who are coming back into life, coming back into a relationship with the Lord, and again, leaving the life of addictive behavior. This is where we as God's people can bring relationship, but we need to show and imitate Christ, and therefore bring Christ to people through how we behave. So yeah,
the book of Proverbs says to walk with the wise.
It does.
And so you have to encourage people to form as many relationships with quote unquote good people as they can.
Yeah. And on that same note too, what life issues seem to be the most common that cause people to medicate from your perspective? What are probably the top 5 that you have seen, again, in your experience, and and also, by the way, everybody, Pastor Lou has been used by God to build bridges to help the church to become more effective with people of all walks of life. And it's been truly inspiring. And that's truly how community recovery came around, because through New Community Church, community recovery was born. And so, right. But what are those top 5?
Well, I don't know about 5, but I think age is one, where you have young people who are going through identity issues and rebellion issues, relationship with parents. So they're 14, 15. I see a lot of that. I either see it in people who are emerging from that age bracket, or people who are 30, 40, 50 years old who look back and they say, that's when it started. When I was in high school, even in junior high, middle school, that's when it started. I here again, with the wrong people, the wrong place, the wrong friends. But a lot of the identity issues growing up. So I would say that certainly is one. Another one is the culture, the fact that people are in a culture in which there's a lot of drinking, and in which pot smoking is becoming more and more acceptable. And I'm not saying that pot should be illegal. I don't know. That's another issue, and that's a voting issue, a government issue. But let's face it, it is very available. And when it's available and people seem to like to feel good and escape. And so the culture that we live in, and here you get people who are 20-ish, in their 20s, early 30s, that they very much get caught up in the culture, even if they're in a dating or marriage relationship, if that person enjoys the same kind of thing, partying. So I think that is another one. I believe another one is, a third one is that people are lonely, and they find that the drink during the afternoon, the drink in the evening is a way to replace the person, the husband or the wife who's always gone, or they don't have a good relationship. And let's face it, alcohol is a drug. And so even though you start off very innocently, taking 3, 4, 5 drinks a day because you're lonely, eventually that could lead to an addiction. Remember very well, this is a lady probably about 50 years of age, very wealthy people. This is when one of our hospitals in town had one floor dedicated to addiction recovery. And I was visiting somebody who had had surgery at the hospital, and I happened to see this lady walking down the hallway. And I said, oh, hi, got a relative or friend here who's sick? She said, no, it's me. She said, I'm on the recovery floor. Now, I about fell over, because this is somebody who was wealthy, sophisticated, a longtime member of the church. But then she said, my husband works a lot. He works late. And I got very accustomed to just sitting at home by myself having drinks. And so the social drink, the drink because you're lonely. I'm going to stop with those 3 because I'm going kind of long.
Yeah. Well, you've identified some key issues: loneliness, disconnectedness, that neglect.
Another one is medication for aches and pains.
Oh, sure, yeah.
You know, the whole opioid thing, getting prescriptions from the doctor, and people get hooked in that way.
Yeah, and well, sure. I mean, the need becomes so great that people will lie, steal, and cheat for it, and we all know this.
Right.
But it's good to identify it, admit it, and get to it, because especially in the COVID-19 world we live in now, it's becoming more and more problematic. People feel more lonely. People feel more isolated. People feel that that the perception of neglect, that I am disconnected, and that's the struggle. But before this whole COVID-19 thing, why do you think people would hide their struggle and say that they're just fine?
Well, embarrassment.
Okay, embarrassment.
Embarrassment is a big part of it, especially if it's a sexual addiction.
Sure.
Or if you're living with very conservative people.
Okay.
For example, my mother, the only alcohol we had in the house was a bottle of alcohol to kill germs.
Mm-hmm.
That was it. So if you got a cut, you put alcohol on it and screamed a little bit, but it did kill the germs. But that was it. She was hostile towards alcohol because she had relatives on her side of the family that were alcoholic, and her stepfather was killed by a drunk driver. So she was just very hostile. Well, if I had a desire to drink, she'd be the last person I would tell because of embarrassment, but then also attack, because there's different ways of dealing with issues in a person's life that you love. And one of them is to attack them. So I find out, for example, you're my son, so I find out that you're doing something that I don't like. There's different ways that I can handle that. And one is to attack, to say, what in the world is the matter with your head?
Mm-hmm.
You stupid jerk, why are you doing that? You better stop that right now or else. Well, once I show hostility towards you and your behavior, if you're going to continue that, you're going to hide it.
Mm-hmm.
So embarrassment, attacks.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it doesn't mean that people we love shouldn't draw boundary lines, but they have to do it in a way that I can still feel loved and accepted. I believe another thing is that many people grow up in an environment in which the parents communicate the message that if you don't live up to our expectations, we might stop loving you. And we all want to be loved.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I reveal that I have such and such a problem, you might stop loving me. And I don't want to not be loved, or I don't want you to leave me, so I'm not going to reveal it. Mm-hmm. And a final thing is, I may not want to get rid of the problem. And even if I believe that you're loving and accepting and helpful and kind, and if I tell you my problem, you're going to help me get rid of it, well, I'm not going to tell you because I don't want to get rid of it. St. Augustine, the great saint, said, Lord, I pray that you will help me to be chaste. That means, chaste means sexually pure. He said, Lord, I pray that you will help me to be chaste, but not yet.
True. Embarrassment. Perhaps that's what you may be struggling with today as you're watching this, or not feeling good enough to meet the expectations of your parents, no matter how old you are. And because in my experience, and of course in Pastor Lou's experience, we've dealt with adults who still feel like they're 15 or 14 years old in the relationship with their mom and dad, who are still living or not. And so whatever issues you're dealing with, it's an embarrassment. It's that the dictate of expectations. And so in response to that, Pastor Lou, what would you recommend to those who are struggling with those key things about embarrassment, the toxicity of expectations, and so on?
Well, they have to find a responsible, caring person to share this with. And here, of course, is one of the fundamental principles that you find running through AA and the 12 steps. You share it with God, but you also perhaps find a pastor, a counselor, but you have to be very careful, because if you reveal your problem to people that aren't willing to accept you and the problem, they may very well reject you. Mm-hmm. Now you not only have the problem, but you also have the problem of rejection. Mm-hmm. So, and this is why it's very important that when pastors preach and when other church members get up in front and say things, that people can sense whether or not they would be a good candidate to go to reveal their problems. So it wasn't that long ago, I had a young man come into my office, and he said, blah, 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 this and that, and so on and so forth. Oh, and by the way, and then he revealed a weak area in his life. And I'm sure he was thinking that I might fall off my chair, throw him out of my office, bring down hellfire and brimstone. But I just sat there and I said, okay, glad you told me. Thank you. Now, what we need to do is we need to talk about boundary lines, what's acceptable, what's not, and how to help you to deal with this. So that was the way that I handled it, so that by the time we were finished, he felt respected, he felt loved, but he also felt that he had some direction.
Certainly.
So find a person. And then that person too can perhaps help you to deal with those that you love, like parents or a husband or a wife, how to deal with them, how to go to them and talk with them. Especially if they've already found acceptance with you, if they go to that wife or that husband or to those parents and reveal the problem and say, I want you to know they've already talked to the pastor, and the pastor loves me, respects me, accepts me, cares about me. Well, now if the parents toss them out of the house, the parents realize that they're doing something that the pastor didn't. Mm-hmm. The fact that the pastor is giving support encourages the parents to give support.
Right. And what you're describing is go to a safe person who can then reestablish trust with God. I mean, God uses people.
Oh, yeah.
And God's people are God's conduit of new beginnings. Right. And of course, of listening and then speaking, but of course, then reestablishing that trust, so that to help that person bridge over back to mom and dad, and all bridge over back into others in their circles, Lord willing, hopefully, where there can be some healing. And then that's what we want to offer you today, and to get a checkup here. What's going on? Are you feeling embarrassed? Are you not trusting other people for particular reasons because of those expectations? Or, you just don't want to reveal because you have a fear of rejection. It's very real for all of us. But with God's help, we can go forward. And to close out, Pastor Lou, as we go forward in this virus crisis, there are unprecedented, that's a big, big word. Unheard of measures that we need to go to today to help our communities to go forward, to remain, spiritually healthy as well as emotionally, mentally healthy. Of course, that always begins with God, of course, but from pastor to people, what are your recommendations for us today as we go forward? Because we hear rumors that, churches can't meet together 50 or more people, or even that, till 2021, and all these things. What do we do?
Okay. Well, one thing you can do is, if you want to meet with your pastor, contact your pastor and ask if you can. A lot of churches will have an area outside where they have a picnic table or benches, say in a children's play area, and say, can I meet you and sit at the picnic table? Perhaps we're not permitted to go into the building. And by the way, that's our policy here. We're not doing any counseling inside of the building. But on several occasions, I have met people out at the picnic table, and we sit in the approved distance, so you can still have contact. Secondly, you've got to plan your day. When you get up in the morning, know where you're heading, know what you're going to do, so that you don't, by 11 o'clock in the morning, feel that you have accomplished nothing, you're going no place, nothing's happening. Plan your day with meaningful things. Say, okay, this morning I'm going to work outside. I'm going to do some chores out in the garage or whatever. Plan your day so that when the day is finished and you have completed your plan, you feel some sense of accomplishment. Mm-hmm. Next, make sure that you're doing something constructive with your mind. And so don't sit and watch TV all day. You watch some TV, Price is Right or something. But what I would do is, you can't go to the Christian bookstores right now because they're probably closed. But what you can do is you can check into subscribing to some Christian magazines. And here again, check with your pastor to get some names of some. Just as an example, I've been sitting here today reading from a magazine I subscribe to. It's called Christian History. Now, I like history, and this one is a good one. So if I have some good magazines or books, And I know that I'm going to eat supper and then I'm going to sit down in my recliner and I've got a good magazine article to read. That's something to look forward to. That's constructive. That's good. Then, of course, social media. Now, one of the things I believe that we're going to gain from this COVID-19 business is that we're going to learn more about using social media and using it in a constructive way, even if it comes to the telephone. But call people. I had a man call me today. He was on the phone with me for about a half hour. And he happens to be one of those who feels that our state is being too restrictive. And so he had a rant and rave for a while and talk about taking away our rights and so forth. And I just listened to him. He needed to get it off his chest. Now, I had one of our members stop at my house a few days ago, stand out on the sidewalk while I was in the driveway, and they had a rant and rave on the other end of it. Why can't people understand how serious this is? And why don't they wear masks and so forth? So they had a rant. So I just sat and listened. But to use social media, to talk, to share, very. So there's some hints. And of course, television now, it's the news, all it is hints on how to be creative at home, how you can take paper plates and make things with the kids with yarn and all of that. But anyway, people are trying. Keep it up.
Keep it up.
But plan your day. Plan your day with constructive things so that when your day is finished, you can feel that you've done something meaningful, and do that every day.
True. And you just answered the question inadvertently. How do I find purpose in my day? Every day, one day at a time. And of course, first we look to the Lord, and then we, of course, read his word as far as prayer, scripture reading, and again, the plan. I agree. And I think many who are watching also agree. And it's probably a good reminder too, because it's too easy to get. And of course, we are all dealing with the being upended, and the feeling of equilibrium and balance has been thrown off balance. But hopefully to bring us back to balance with God, each other, and of course with what you said too, because God loves you and we do too. For those who are watching, check up with Dr. Mark here at Community Recovery. Thank you, Pastor Lou. God bless you.
Good job, son.
Well, thank you, Father. And this is Dr. Mark. See you next time.
Bye-bye.